I'm not sure if I'm live yet or not. I will check and see. But if I am, happy Saturday to you. And if you're on the other side of the planet, happy Sunday to you. I'm doing a new system. I think I told you guys for the last few weeks that in this new system, I don't really know whether I'm live or not. So, it looks like I'm live. And there's only one person watching, which is me. Interesting. So we'll wait a second and see. Hi, there we go. Hi, Karen. And I'm just waiting for you guys to get here, and I'm setting up something. All right, great. All right, so now we're getting some people. It's starting to populate. I have to scoot my chair up. So, well, what's the latest news here? Have you guys ever heard, excuse me, or seen the Netflix movie documentary about the Raelians? And I was kind of skimming it, and funny enough, I may have even thought that would be an interesting guest to have. And funny enough, I was contacted by them, and I did a video with them the other day, and it should be coming out maybe on Monday next week. And I thought, I kind of wished I would have watched that movie before, and I just ran out of time. But I'm kind of glad that I didn't, because I probably would have had these ideas about them that may or may not be true, and so I didn't want to have this preset ideas. So I'm glad that I kind of came with an open mind for them, and so I hope you guys will enjoy that. And it says good morning from Israel. Norma, thank you for excuse me, thank you for watching in Israel. I appreciate that. So I didn't have Rael himself on, but I had one of his top guys, and he's a rabbi, and I didn't realize that Rael is like part of the word Israel, and there's quite a bit of, I think, Judaism involved in that. So it was a learning situation for me, and I'm glad I did it, and I hope you guys will like that. Besides that, tomorrow's guest is Vivian Chavez, and she is a big time UFO guest. So I've had her once before, and she came on and we talked to her. And I did record an NDE this morning. And what do I got scheduled this week? Let's see. And I'm just waiting for a few more people to get here before we get started, because my guest is already there. An NDD on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and I think on Wednesday is my first NDE from Belgium, and then an NDE on Friday. So it's pretty jam-packed with NDEs this week. So that should be pretty cool for those of you that like NDEs. All right, so I think that we probably have enough people here. 90 people. So that should be good enough. And let me tell you who's first. I may need to get a drink here in a second. We'll just see. I keep coughing. I was kind of under the weather actually all this week. I don't even know I'm curious if you guys noticed. I just basically kept going, you know what I mean? But I mean, I wasn't feeling well for a few days, and today I'm pretty good. All right, so let me tell you about the guests. Our first guest, we have two guests. We have Beth Bell, and then we are going to have later Jost or Jost. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But Beth is first. She was a marketing executive star. She spent 16 years in the pharmaceutical industry, and at some point she left that. She ditched her corporate life to pursue life's purpose of pollinating the planet with love. As her inward journey deepened, Beth became known as the Flower Whisperer. That's interesting. And forged new paths. First as an entrepreneur designing silver jewelry in Bali, then as a radio TV show host and author, She's also a multidimensional advisor for CEOs and psychedelics or something like that. And she's living in America right now. So let's bring in Beth and see what she is up to. Where is she? Let me find her here. There she is. Admit. Hello, Beth. Can you hear me?
Hear you.
All right, welcome. You know what's so fascinating is I was wishing you were still in Bali because my next guest is in Tahiti. And so what
Ooh.
would have been a coincidence like Bali and Tahiti today? Isn't I mean isn't Bali kind of by Tahiti's? At least aren't they both in the
Um,
Pacific Ocean?
yeah, they're not that close, but it would be like definitely in that part of the world, which would be really fun. And then you'd hear ducks in the background and motorbikes and lots of other crazy things.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know, in the big, I just told everybody that you are the flower whisperer. So what do you mean by that?
Well, I was in a corporate life and I had just a really crazy busy mind. And I
Mm-hmm.
knew that I was supposed to be meditating. And the universe kind of pulled a good one on me and got me looking at flowers and photographing flowers to the point where I realized that it was the universe's way of actually getting me to meditate,
Hmm.
but not in a traditional sense. And
Yeah.
so, it's sort of my first soiree into really quieting my mind. And then what would start to happen is I would get these messages that would come from the flowers as I was photographing them. And I just became mesmerized and sort of obsessed with this activity. I'd carry my camera everywhere, even in my corporate life, and I would, take pictures all the time. And it just was a great way to get me connected to source. And, I didn't realize exactly how that was going to all unfold, but that's how it started as a flower whisperer. And then I realized, oh, yeah, the importance of really quieting the mind so we can get the bigger messages and really be tapped into our higher self.
Well, would you say that that was or was that, or I don't know how to say that. Maybe I don't, it doesn't sound like something that gave you a transformative experience, or maybe it was. And if not, did you have something like that?
Yeah. I wouldn't say that that was my awakening experience. I would
Hmm.
say that that started to lead me in to being really connected with source and being connected to Mother Nature. But the big awakening came for me in kind of an untraditional way. I was married. I thought I was happily married, and I had an opportunity to fly with someone across the United States, and somewhere at 30,000 feet, there was an awakening kiss that took place. And now you might just say, oh, we just had an affair.
Yeah.
But it wasn't really that. It was that this person became such an awakening agent for me because they woke me up, and I couldn't deny at that point, like what happened to me on a cellular level was beyond like just a physical attraction. It was literally a wake up moment where I said, oh my gosh, I have been lying to myself for a lot of years about the traditional marriage that I was in that checked all the boxes, but it wasn't my soul's plan. And so I had to have a real heart to heart with myself and say, wait, what is it that I'm really here to do? And then made some really big decisions as a result of that. And I would say that was really what catapulted me into my awakening, because I just said, how is that possible that just by a kiss, it was like the prince that kissed the toad, or whatever that story is. It
Yeah.
felt sort of like that, where I just woke up at a cellular level. It was the first time that I really had a taste of who I really was. And I knew that I was living a life that was not really my destiny. And
So,
so that's the awakening.
are you saying that you were just with the wrong person, or you shouldn't be married, period, and should be doing something else?
Well, that's a great question. At the time, it was definitely that I was married to the right person, but the soul contract was over. So
Hmm.
that was the tough part, was not wanting to recognize, because we get comfortable. We're married. I got married to stay married. I grew up in the Midwest, and like I took that commitment really seriously. So I didn't think divorce was an option. And I didn't think that my soul was going to tell me at a cellular level that it was time to move on and to really dive into my spiritual awakening journey. So that was a big surprise to me.
So, what is your life purpose then, if it wasn't to be married and have the white picket fence and
Yeah,
2.5 kids.
yeah, right. Well, it took me a while actually to kind of figure that out because I still worked in corporate America, and people that know me today are like, "You're doing what?" And people that knew me from then are saying, "You're doing what?" So I feel like I've lived these really parallel lives with what I was doing and what I'm doing now. And I'm an awakening agent. And it took me a while to actually like anchor that in myself because society doesn't tell us that that's okay. Society doesn't say, yeah, it's okay to just go off the grid and wear a crown on a show and show up and say that only love is real and all of the things that people want to peg you as a unicorn or say that you're out there. And so that's also what I'm excited about on the show is that I know your listeners and your viewers are out there with me, and we're now starting to run a little bit more in herds as opposed to feeling like we're the one-off unicorn. And
Hmm.
so I think it's really important that we help each other to be able to know that we are not alone in this journey of awakening, the planet and humanity as a whole. Not everybody wants to be woken up, so that's okay too. But it is about helping to awaken inner wisdom for people because there's a lot of people that are asleep, and then there's a lot of people who are just starting to wake up, and then there's people who are like deeply immersed in it and are really ready to help humanity in a much larger way.
So when you say you're an awakening agent, you are going out there and waking people up. Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's actually much simpler than that. I'm shining the light and showing the way. And the way that we do that is we have to dismantle the program. So we're born into, our human bodies and we choose our parents. We come in and we have all these soul contracts with people, and we get instilled with these ideas and these beliefs about how we're supposed to be, how we're supposed to act, what we're supposed to believe. There's societal constructs, there are social constructs, there are religious constructs, they're ancient ancestral constructs. And so it's like this filtering through all of these programs. And so as I say, awakening agent, one of the ways that I do that is help to be a transformer of relationships and heartbreak, because heartbreak is one of the ways that gets us really to take notice and to say, maybe there's another way, because most people don't want to suffer in heartbreak. And so
Hmm.
that offers an opportunity to really get in and say, okay, wait a second, what is this relationship all about?
I don't want to pry into your life, but I'm just curious. How did your husband at the time take it when you said you needed to make a change?
Yeah. Well, he felt like the rug had been pulled out from underneath him. He did not want it. It took me six plus years to actually get divorced. I had no children. It shouldn't have been that difficult, but it was. And I think that also is really typical oftentimes of men and women in our relationships because we speak different languages. And so there was warning signs, I think, all along for both of us, but neither one of us were necessarily heeding them. And so I think there was a lot of warning signs that I was giving, but I wasn't speaking my truth. And so that's where my responsibility and my accountability had to come in to say, no, wait a second, I'm really responsible here. I'm the creator of my life. And so that started me on the whole trajectory of understanding that. I mean, this is many years ago. This is back in 2005. Really understanding that I am the creator of my life. And that just changed my whole trajectory of how I navigated in the world.
Hmm. I was checking out your YouTube channel, and one of your popular videos is about an empath survival guide.
Hmm.
Now, does that refer to you and your relationship? Like, were you an empath and your husband was a narcissist?
Well, I wouldn't call my husband a narcissist. I definitely slept with the devil, and I definitely have had experience with a narcissist.
Hmm.
But the video that you probably would have seen is I do a live Q&A show. So my viewers ask me questions, and then I answer the questions, and I channel them from my higher self and through the crown chakra. And so, but I can speak to that very personally because I have actually had those experiences. I think as we awaken and we raise our vibration, we expand our consciousness and we shine our light brighter, inevitably we bring some interesting characters into our life. And I think everyone has to probably cross the path of a narcissist. And so there's a real thing between, an empath narcissist. And there's great lessons to be learned in that. A lot of people feel like they're a victim when they come across a narcissist, but I like to think that they're some of the biggest and best experiences that we can have. I'm not saying I like the pain that they cause, but it really gets you into a space where you have to understand that as an empath, someone who's really feeling other people's feelings and also just really in the light and wanting to do well in the world, that there are these really negative and darker entities that want to suck from us. And sometimes it's not even intentional, because it's the programs that they're running, right? It's the heartbreak that they had, that they were a wounded child, that they had love taken away from them. And so everything always comes back to love, giving and receiving love, or do we have love, or do we fear losing love? That's really the biggest challenge that everyone suffers from.
Do you think there are a lot of narcissists out there? Because there are a ton of videos about it. And there's even a lot on YouTube about empaths destroy narcissists, or this empath narcissist relationship, and why are they attracted to each other?
Yeah, I think there could be potentially more narcissists today than ever before, but I haven't looked at any data to substantiate that. I think that there's people that are either here for themselves or here for humanity, or they're somewhere in between trying to make the shift. And that doesn't mean that everybody's a narcissist if they're not here to help humanity. I'm not saying that either. But there's a real energy about it. And empaths, awakening, people who are awakening, need to learn these lessons. They need to learn about how energies work, because otherwise you can just be very naive and go about your merry way and not actually know what boundaries to put up. I'll give an example that's a little bit off from the empath narcissist, but I think it also makes a similar point. When I moved to Bali, I thought I was going to be there for 3 months, and I ended up staying 5.5 years. And I went there to heal a broken heart. I'd come off of sleeping with the devil in India. And I thought, oh, I'm here to live in the light, and I'm here to, do all these great things. But what ended up happening was I realized that I was actually in Bali to learn all about the dark, and to learn all about black magic, and to learn all about how these energies swirl. So I think, coming back to the empath narcissist, the narcissist helps us understand some of the darker energies, some of the more selfish energies. And an empath is always going to think, oh, I can heal them, I can help them, I can heal. And that's also a program that the empath needs to move beyond. We're not actually here to heal anyone else. We're here to heal ourselves back to wholeness that we already are, and then shine the light and show the way. And that gets really confusing for a lot of empaths, because they want to be that healer and they want to help someone else. And I'm not saying we don't help our brothers and sisters, of course we do, but we're not here to heal them. We're here to really help show the way, not heal them. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
There we go.
That's my fault. You obviously don't know this, and probably many people even in the audience don't know this, but when I first started this podcast, the majority of the guests I could get were dating coaches.
Oh,
And I
okay.
privated all those videos. I thought they were great videos, and I had all these dating coaches. It was a lot of fun, and but for some reason they just didn't do well. And when I started doing what I'm doing now, it took off. And I think this is the
Okay.
path where I'm supposed to be at. But
Yeah.
anyways, now that I've said that, um, I wanted to add to the empath thing. And do you think that a lot of women, and I think you may talk about relationship stuff anyways, is kind of what you're into from
Yeah.
looking at your YouTube channel. Do you think a lot of women, they find a guy, but they still want to change him? Like, yeah, he's pretty good, but there's some changes I need to make to kind of, smooth out
Yeah.
the edges a little bit.
Yeah. All women fall in love with men's potential, and they
Yeah.
spend their life trying to change them. Absolutely.
Yeah. So I was just curious on your take on that.
Yeah. Well, I think, just to go a little bit deeper into that, since you asked, I think men and women are actually not that difficult to figure out. I think it's quite simple. Men are oriented towards solutions, and they want to provide women solutions, and women have, so they're very black and white, and women have a lot of shades of gray, and they have a lot of emotions. and the woman needs to be validated for her emotion, and the man doesn't want to do it because he's like, oh my God, that's so crazy. Like, I've got the solution right here. Why don't you just do the solution? And the woman's like, no, no, no. And so they have to kind of run around and say all these emotions and be heard. And if a man could just stop for 1 second and say, honey, I see that you feel X, Y, or Z, upset or whatever, then the woman feels validated, and then she can kind of move through it. But on the flip side, if a woman could just say to a man, honey, I see that that solution makes a lot of sense, but I really need to just have you hear me out and hear about the emotion. So it's not that complicated. Like, we make it really complicated, but it's not that complicated.
Mm. There is another thing I wanted to ask you, and I got that also from your YouTube channel. And this is a different subject, but I got you here, so I'm going to ask you all kinds of stuff. You have a video titled "The Truth About Tarot."
Mm-hmm.
What is the truth that we don't know? Like, what are we missing here?
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of times people rely on external sources to give them insights. And while that's not bad, you can do that. You can use tarot cards, you can use lots of different techniques and modalities, and I'm all for those. But what I'm really for is for people dismantling their own programs so they can tap into their own inner wisdom and get the guidance from themselves, because there's a lot of energies at play that can influence a tarot card reading. It can be the reader itself. It can be something that's happening in your life. And so the encouragement really is to tap into source intelligence yourself. And you talk a lot about that with other guests too, where they're abducted by aliens and they're able to really tune in then to a whole nother level. So what I'm talking about is not just relationship stuff. This is more about you as a person really getting into what are the programs that you have, dismantling them from an ancestral perspective, but also it can go back into your star seeds, because star seeds have come here for certain reasons as well, and they have purposes on the planet. And so it's really digging deeper into what is it that you're here to do, dismantling the programs and getting template transmissions so that you can raise your vibration and help humanity and really live your purpose here on planet Earth.
If you don't mind, I want to dig deeper into dismantling a program.
Yeah.
So how do you do that, and what are the specific programs that you have to take apart?
It completely depends upon the person. So, like, I'm just going to say a really basic one. So for me, way back when I left my husband, I had to start dismantling the program about marriage, that marriage was something that I needed to stay in. Really basic one. It might be a religious program that you need to dismantle. It might be a program around money, that I have to work hard and be humble in order to make money. And when we start dismantling those programs and we start realizing, no, I can just actually receive money for being me and being who I am. But that's a hard program, because you've got to go up against all the fear of society that says, no, 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 no. If you get out of the 3D matrix and you do something that's off the grid, then you risk, not making enough money. You risk being poor. You risk, being on the streets. And so there's a lot of fear around some of these programs that say, no, 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 don't step out. Don't be different. Don't be different than someone else. So there's a lot of different programs that people are working through. And so there's not just one in particular that you're going to work through and everything's going to be the be all end all. I think it's really the contract, the soul contract of which you came in here with, that you are going to play out. And those are the contracts and the people and the programs that you're going to dismantle. Now, how do you do it? I think also depends on the program and the person. Sometimes it's a person, sometimes it's a situation that's helping us, right? Everything is in our external reality as a reflector of our internal state. And so that's really the key point, is just to be the observer to some degree, right, of what's going on in our external world, to see, well, what do I need to change? What program do I need to eliminate? What do I need to line up with so that I can really be a pillar of light?
All right, three things real quick.
Yeah.
Do you mind if the audience asks you questions?
Oh, no, I would love it.
So if you guys want to ask her questions, be sure to put it in the chat, and actually put it in all caps. That helps me helps us differentiate a question from you guys just chatting with each other. And then two things. When you're speaking about programs, is it basically the same thing as limiting beliefs? I'm going to let you answer all of this. And the second part is, how does somebody truly discover what their contracts are? If you're talking about pre-birth contracts, like how do they do that?
Yeah. So yeah, there was a lot there. If I miss one, you'll have to bring me
Okay.
back. But I think you can say programs are limiting beliefs. I think that's a true statement, but I think it's more than that because the programs are also societal programs. They're community programs. You know how the like Germans have a different way of thinking than the French versus the American. So there's a lot of programs that come to us culturally, right? That's not just, it is a belief, but it's so in the collective conscious that we actually don't know that it's like a fish that's in water. It doesn't know it's in water until it's out of the water. So there's an element of that, there's so many layers of the programs. And how we break the programs, I think it's just depends on what's up for you. Like what's limiting you? Like what is it that's tugging at your heartstrings? Because it's about how we feel about our reality and about what's happening in our world and then what we want to do about that. I mean, there's hypnotherapy, there's lots of different ways to get into the subconscious mind. But again, I'm always going to come back to it's so important to line up with your own inner wisdom. It can be breath work, it can be spiritual medicine experiences. So there's a lot of different ways, and no path is the same, right? No two paths are the same on this journey. We know that. So it's really finding which path is your path and which modality, tip, tool, or technique is right for you in that moment with whatever program it is that you're dismantling.
What about discovering your soul contract? How does
Yeah.
a person do that?
Again, I think it's very similar in the sense that you're staying aware of what it is that you want versus what it is that you don't want, right? So your soul contract is with your parents, it's with the loved ones that you have in your life. You have soul contracts with a lot of people. So you want to find out why is it that I'm just making this up, it's not true for me. Why is it that my mother and I don't get along? What is that soul contract? And what is my soul contract with myself? Like, what am I here to contribute? And that takes sometimes lifetimes to break through to understand, what is it that I'm really here to do for humanity? Because in one lifetime, you might just be doing a really 3D job. You
Hmm.
might just be participating in the well-oiled machine here, or you might not. And that's where the awakening often comes is when you go, wait, there's like, I realize that I'm in a matrix here, and there's something so much more than just being a cog in the wheel and being like everyone else.
Since you live here in the US, like most of the viewers,
Yeah.
and you kind of mentioned a program earlier, and that was if you're married, you have to stay married forever.
Yeah.
I feel like that's a program. Are there other common programs to our culture that you can mention to us that, you find over and over in people?
I think the wealth program is a big thing. I think that you have to work in a certain way and you have to be part of a system. Otherwise, I think we wouldn't see starving artists. We wouldn't see um, some of the spiritual community struggle so much. So I think that there are some programs there that are beyond the individual person. Starving artists, I think, is a good one because a lot of them don't quite break through that pressure of doing something that they really, really love and expressing themselves in that way. So I think, money is certainly a huge program. I also think religion is a huge program. The idea of religion, of organized religion. And, there's I guess, a lot we could talk about there, and how that all got started. But that's also a really big program. And it's something that stops people from wanting to connect into who they really are and their own soul contract in this lifetime.
Hmm. All right. Let me catch a few questions here. Someone wants to know about your crown, and I have to say it's a beautiful crown. Where did you get that?
Yeah, thank you. Well, I actually went to a consciousness conference and I happened to be waiting for a friend of mine. I walked over to this jewelry table and I said, I'm not going to wear a crown. Why would I ever wear a crown? And I tried this crown on just to see what actually happened. And it wasn't so much what happened when I put the crown off, but it was when I put it on, it was when I took the crown off that I could feel exactly the points on my head where the crown was anchored in. and I felt a transmission come from the crown and also from my crown chakra. And so I thought, I think this is something I really want to explore. So I bought the crown, and I wore the crown home, and I wore it around in San Diego, and I had to really just sit with the feeling of everyone, whether it was someone judging me or someone saying, "Oh, that crown looks great," or there was lots of different comments that came around it, and also how we carry ourselves very different when we step into our own kingdom and queendom. And so it's, through a broken heart oftentimes that we don't step through. So the crown is really a symbolic way of encouraging others. I wear this on my show about awaken inner wisdom. And it's a symbolic way of really encouraging others to also step into their kingdoms and their queendoms, and to really be open in their crown chakra to receive their inner wisdom.
Hmm. All right. I have a question here. Someone wants to know your take on the Course of Miracles.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of A Course in Miracles. It was one of my early studies, actually. As I went through my first awakening journey, I definitely I had an awakening agent that worked with me. I called him my spiritual healer at the time, and he was a Course in Miracles master, and he really helped me through the course. So yeah, I'm absolutely a huge fan.
All right. I don't know if you said this or not, but someone put in a question. Maybe you did see it and it went right by me. What does sleeping with the devil in India mean?
Okay. Yeah. Well, I did talk about that briefly. And when there's 7 things, there's probably more, but there's 7 things that I said, that I would never do. And one of those was leave my job for a man. And while I was working in Singapore, I fell madly in love with a gentleman and decided that I would move. He was not Indian, but that I would move to India.
Mhm.
And that was my situation, where I was sleeping with the devil and sleep an empath with a narcissist. So I had a really intense situation there, and realized at that point that I was with a sociopathic narcissist and had to find ways to actually escape India. And that's what led me to Bali. So after I had left my job, yeah, I had to, but an experience that I needed to go through. I obviously called him in as a spiritual contract for me to be able to ascend and to break through lots of other programs, and also to get out of my corporate life, which I may not have left if I hadn't left for love, which I said I wouldn't do. But yeah, so that's what sleeping with the devil is. It's how I got into that situation and how I got myself out of that situation and healing from that situation.
All right. Yeah, I think I remember it now. I think you just kind of said it quickly and moved on when we were talking about
Yeah.
empaths. Well, have you ever had any UFO contact?
A couple of things that I would share on that. I would say that as we wake up and we start to realize that we're star seeds and we have other affiliations. I looked back at a couple of things in my life. One, when I was younger, I was probably 6 or 7. I realize now that I would say, being abducted by my starseed family, but at the time, I couched it as a really bad dream, and it was a reoccurring dream, something that would happen to me quite a bit. So that is something that I've reflected on and realized that there's probably been many contact points, and many other things have happened to me since then, that I feel have really brought me back to being in connection with my starseed family. But I have not seen a UFO myself, no.
All right. Sorry about that. I have a mute button on my thing here, and every now and then I just kind of happen to press it and I forget
Yeah.
about it. So that's what's happening. Anyways, now everybody knows. What is your galactic lineage? Like, are you Pleiadian, Arcturian, or something else?
Yeah, I affiliate mostly with Pleiadian, but I think that many of us are a mix. And it came to me, I wasn't really looking to see about being my starseed origins. I actually had several things that led up to it that I feel happens when we become ready to know where we're from. And not everybody needs to know where they're from, and not everyone needs to um, study their, I don't believe everyone needs to study their starseed family, but I had a reading that took place, and I started to realize that, if I ignore some of this, it's sort of like ignoring my ancestral lineage, because there's so much that we can learn from our starseed family, just like we can learn from our ancestral family, things that happened. I'm Scandinavian, so there's lots of programs in there as well that we can learn from.
All right. Well, I just want to let people know, I'm just going to give myself a plug here real quick, that I did post a video today of a man that does galactic astrology, and he helps people figure out what their galactic lineage is from their birthday and where it's lined up with all planets and all that stuff. So if you're into that, take a look.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then, so we're talking about dismantling the programs, and which in a way could be limiting beliefs. Beside, yeah, I guess you could even say that the way you were raised is a program constantly running, right? I mean, even from
Yeah,
childhood,
absolutely.
everything is, basically your whole life is a program in
Yep.
a way, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Everything that we run on is a program. So we want to choose which programs we want to dismantle and which ones we want to keep, which ones are serving us.
Which, are you into Dr. Joe Dispenza's work at
I
all?
am.
So I would
I am.
say that it must be even harder, because now literally you got the biochemistry of emotions that it's so addictive, as well as your brain is neurologically hardwiring itself into these programs. So, what are some of the best ways to be able to actually stick to breaking it and not, falling off the wagon and going back to these old patterns?
Yeah. I think some of them are the basics of meditation. I'm always going to go back to the same thing to say that awakening your inner wisdom and quieting your mind. So there has to be techniques. For me, I think that remote writing is a great way, because you're actually pausing to feel into the energies of what it is that's coming forward for you. Situations like heartbreak. Um, I think that going deeper into the emotion of what is it that I called this person in for? What is the deeper meaning of this relationship? And so I believe that journaling is a big part of this, as well as meditation. But there's so many. It's like I feel like you're asking me a great question, and there's so many that are particular to the person at the time that something's happening. So it's not always that it's like a one size fits all, and that's where I think it's fun, because you can actually dismantle your own programs and understand what it is that you've called into your own life.
Hmm. All right. Now you have a book out. Let me see. I wrote it down. Angels, Herpes, and Psychedelics.
Yeah.
How did you come up with that title?
Yeah. Angels, herpes, and
And it's
psychedelics.
interesting that you mix herpes with angels and psychedelics. It's like
Yeah.
usually you don't have those two topics together.
No, you don't. The angels is all about the celestial and the terrestrial angels that are in our life. The herpes is about the mind viruses, but also a very vulnerable story that I talk about in the book. And psychedelics, and the little toad that's on the front, is about the spiritual medicines and the embodiment that, we can have a lot of intellectual knowledge on our awakening journey, but it's really about embodying the expanded states of consciousness. And so the title came from my higher self. I at first I was like, "Ooh, I don't think that this is really what I want to call the title of my book,"
Hmm.
but it's actually proven to be a really great title to evoke interest. And then the subtitle is "Unraveling the Mind to Unveil Illusions."
So since there's a toad on the cover, is that
Yeah.
referring to DMT?
Yes, it's referring to Bufo. Yes,
Have you done it?
I have. Yes.
And what kind of experience did you have? Well, I guess it's interesting. You called it Bufo. Is that the same thing as DMT?
Yeah, it's the toad
It,
is Bufo. Yeah.
you kind of get like the oil off the toad's back or something. Is that how it works?
Yeah, it's a crystal, and it's dried, and it's in a pipe, and you smoke it.
Right.
And so during that experience, it's very different for everyone. For me, my first experience was a complete ego disillusion. I was completely like, it was as though someone poured acid all over my body and all over my mind. And you go directly into oneness, or I did in that journey. And then was able to come back down through the layers. And it was a really interesting experience because it like I said, it really anchored in a lot of intellectual things that you can't actually put words or phrases to in the experience. So it was a very enlightening experience, and it opened my consciousness, and I think really anchored in a lot of things that I had learned in something like A Course in Miracles.
Hmm. Did you see all the colors and things like people see?
I did. I saw colors. I immediately went to oneness though, and then as I came back down, I saw colors and I saw shapes, and yeah, and it was similar to what you might say as a full body orgasm, but having
Hmm.
nothing to do with the genitals,
Right.
where you're just getting an absolute full body cellular soul scrub,
Hmm.
and you're coming back online into this dimension, and just yeah, it's like as though you're cellularly vibrating at a whole different level afterwards.
Do you feel like, or do you think that during this experience, your consciousness left your body?
Um, I think yes, I think our consciousness can. I think our consciousness is still attached to our body, but I definitely was out of my body and I came back into my body. But that's all we are, is consciousness. So that, yes, I think that we can step out, but we're also still attached. I mean, otherwise we have to come back to our bodies, right? We still have to
Right.
have an attachment. It's almost like a little cord that we're still tethered to.
Right. A lot of people call that the silver cord.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I didn't mention this earlier, but some of my guests talk about that there's even a cord or some kind of connection between all of us.
Yeah.
And I just saw something, I think it was last night, and this guy was talking about, well, in the plant world is that same connection, literally with roots, that they're all
Yeah.
interconnected. They're all connected just like we are, but it's under the ground.
Yes. The mycelium network. Yes.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty neat. And,
Yeah.
and someone was saying, just go hug a tree and ask like what your purpose is, and you'll get a download.
Well, I don't know that that's true for everyone, but if it calls to you, then that would be something to do. But I think the importance of what you just said with the mycelium network is that all of our microbiome in our own gut is part of our second brain, and so we are connected, at a cellular level as well. And the mycelium network is a communication, and sort of the internet of Mother Nature underground. But we're also connected to it. So is our bacteria. So is our each cell in our body.
Right. I guess you could say our gut bacteria is connected to that.
Yeah, our gut bacteria is incredibly important and not something that's talked about very much.
Right. Yeah. So have you done ayahuasca?
I have.
What what was your experience on that?
Ayahuasca is a very different plant. I
Hmm.
think it's a very long. It sounds like you've talked about it. Maybe you've done it yourself.
I haven't, but we
Um,
talk about it quite a bit.
okay, you have not. Yeah. Yeah, my first time with ayahuasca, I found very interesting because I fully expected to purge and throw up and all of that, and I didn't have any of that. Actually, I had a very celestial experience. I again felt that I went to more of oneness, and then came back down through the layers, and was able to have some really incredible conversations with my higher self, with other souls that showed up, people that are in my life that were able to share what was happening for them and how I could support them. It was I had asked at that time for a supercellular soul scrub. So I feel that that's what I was able to do, is to be able to just release a lot of the trauma that we experience in our everyday life. It's not always big trauma. It can be like the little trauma that we're experiencing, that if we don't clear it out, then uh, we're not getting rid of it, and it can be stored in our body and cause, other things like disease. And so through my ayahuasca experience, it was a very celestial experience for me. I didn't have a lot of trauma. I felt like I released a lot of trauma and was shown a lot of things that I needed to know for my own soul plan.
Mm. Yeah, I think you're the only person that has ever said that they didn't have all the purging.
Yeah.
And that for me, if I was going to do something like that, that for me would rule ayahuasca out because I can't
Mm.
see any, that's not fun for me to, would be to do all that purging.
Well, I would only offer that the purging is actually so cleansing. And yes, for a lot of people, it doesn't feel good while you're doing it, but there is a real cleansing that comes with it. And it can be very traumatic for some people, but for other people, I've done other sessions where I have had the purging and I still haven't felt it for me to be bad. It's something that I was able to release. And there was even times where I felt like other people were releasing for me and I was releasing for other people. So we're able to get the interconnectedness feeling, and so I wouldn't. I hear you, but I wouldn't say no to it just because of the purging part. It's actually can be a really beautiful experience.
Right. Most of the time, it's the guests will usually say it was a positive experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, well, what about angels? Have you ever had an angel encounter?
I've had a lot of angel encounters actually. Yeah, I think that angels are with us at all times. I think we have our guardian angels, our core angels, and I've had a lot of situations that have happened with my angels. But I also think that there's terrestrial angels. So I think that people that are here can also be angels. People that show up in our life, and they may show up and then be gone. They may be someone who shows up for a very specific purpose. I would say the first time that I was really in touch with one of my angels was soon after the awakening kiss. I was in San Francisco and I was in a water park area, like a water fountain area, not like an amusement water park type of thing. And I was sitting and just really trying to connect in and get some grounding about my life and trying to understand exactly where I was headed with everything. And it was at that time where I felt this presence that really came to me and felt like it was part of me, but it was also separate from me. And I knew that at that point that was one of my guardian angels. And since then, I've had other situations. One was I was at my home, went back into my marital home as I was in the process of divorce to take care of our dog. So I was just there for an evening. And as I was sitting on the sofa and reading a book, I realized that all of a sudden there was five spirits in the room. And it was at that time in my life something that I was actually quite scared of. I didn't want to have encounters with spirits and entities because I felt like that was scary. I wasn't as versed on it. And the five people showed up and they were in flannel shirts and blue jeans, and they had really just one message for me, and it was, "You're doing the right thing, keep going." And it was in the midst of my divorce. And so that was a very calming, and there's just a massive swoosh through my body. And it was really clear that they were there to just support me and for me to know that they're there and that we can always ask for help.
Hmm, that's great. Well, what else are you working on that you want people to know about?
Well, I have a YouTube channel and I do a live Q&A on Sundays at 11:11, and it's all about awakening inner wisdom. There's also a membership people can join if they feel that they want to go deeper into subjects of awakening and expanding consciousness and dismantling programs and templates. There's also books and guides on my website that are available. And I did, as you mentioned, live in Bali for several years, and I have a business base there. And I have jewelry, necklaces, mini mantra word bar necklaces that I also sell on my website. They're really to help empowering pure love and purpose. So they're very intentional pieces and something that's there to help you manifest whatever it is that you desire.
If people want to ask you questions, should they do that by going to your website and filling out some sort of contact form, or just leave a comment on a video?
They can go to bethbell.me/question and they can submit their question. Yeah. Or they can leave comments on videos, either way, but they can do it more privately if they actually submit their question on bethbell.me/question.
All right. And your videos are just live, right? And they're a live Q&A.
They are. They're
Oh,
live Q&A.
well, there you
Yeah.
are. There you go. If you just have to make it at 11:11. What is that? Central or Eastern time, or what time is that zone?
Pacific
Pacific
time.
time, 11:11 Pacific. Then you can connect with her directly.
Yes.
Cool. All right. Well, before we finish up here, can you leave us all with one last positive message?
Only love is real. And the only way to pure love is through forgiveness of others and forgiveness of ourselves.
Beth, thank you for your message and thank you for coming and being my guest today. I really appreciate you.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate being on your show.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Beth. Have a great
All
rest
right.
of your weekend.
You too. Bye bye.
Bye bye. All right. That was Beth. And I have my next guest coming up soon. But before I bring them in, I just wanted to let you know that again, tomorrow's video is with Vivian Chavez. She's a big time UFO person. I have, for those of you that weren't here earlier, and if you've seen, there's a Netflix special about the Raelians from a guy named Rael or Rael from France, and he's still living in Japan. I didn't have him on, but I had one of his top people on. They contacted me, and it was a very interesting conversation about what Raelism is all about and how it got started. And I hope the video does really well because I think if it does, maybe we can actually get Rail on himself from Japan. That would be pretty cool. But if you have or have not seen that show about him on Netflix, then you can check it out and or even if you have, you can check it out and see what he has to say. And I think he talked about how, you know, maybe potentially there was some untruths about them during that special, or they weren't shown exactly quite accurately, maybe is the right word. All right, so anyways, that's going on. That's in the near future. Our next guest is Josh, and I think I don't have to ask him when he gets here. Jost or Jost, we'll see. But he from childhood grew up as a Mennonite, which is basically the same thing as Amish, right? And I'm curious to see where he was because I used to live in northern Alabama, like so close to Tennessee. I was there for about 6 months, and right over into the Tennessee border was a Mennonite community, and I used to go there and buy, I think, cookies from them. But they kind of have farm stuff. Anyways, he's from that community. He eventually had some sort of healing moment in his life. And he's lived, like, I think, all over the world. And he has an amazing story. He told me that I think he used to live in Scotland. And the Queen Elizabeth and her husband used to visit the house where he lived at quite often. And more stuff like that. So it should be real interesting. Let's bring him in. And see, there he is. Say ask to unmute, ask to start video. And I haven't even met him. He reached out to me and he sent me some videos, and here we are. First time. Josh, can you hear me?
Yeah, hi Jeff. Can you hear me okay?
I can. And you are live from Tahiti, yes?
Yes, I am. Greetings from Tahiti, or Iorana, as they say here, is the local greeting.
Where is, my last guest I was talking to her, and she used to live in Bali, and I was saying, I hope she's in Bali because it'd be so amazing to have two guests in a row from from these Pacific islands.
Yeah, what a small world, eh? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
we're located, it's about a 5-hour flight due south of Hawaii.
Okay.
So we're in the same time zone as Hawaii, and we're about as far south of the equator as Hawaii is north. So it's a very similar climate if you've been to Hawaii and Tahiti.
What time is it over there right now?
It is almost 3 p.m.
3 p.m. Sunday. Wow. So you're.
No, we're Saturday. We're on this side of the
Oh,
dateline.
wow. Okay, that's
Yeah,
right.
yeah,
Because
where I believe
you're at the
Bali is
same time as
on the other side.
Hawaii.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes,
I didn't even.
correct.
Oh,
Yeah.
that's right. I didn't put that together. Oh, that's cool. Well, I'm.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard me speaking, but I was talking about that I used to live really close to a Mennonite community. Which one did you grow up in, or where were you?
So I grew up, there was sort of two big communities that in the US that I grew up in a bit in both. I was born in Kansas, there's a little town called Hillsborough. And then so my father was from that town. And then there's another town in Central California where my mother was from, that I spent a lot more of my life in. in later years. And interestingly enough, it was kind of all over the national news. There was a Chinese lab that was cultivating COVID and all sorts of other pathogens in this tiny little central California town. And that was my town, which was kind of shocking for everyone there because
Hmm.
there's basically two types of people in this town, and that's it. It's about right now it's about 60-70% Hispanic, and then it's about 40% Mennonite.
Wow.
And so it's you would have stuck out like a sore thumb. So how they're operating there is incredible. But anyway, so yeah, so that was my experience. There's sort of for those who aren't familiar with the Mennonites, yeah, they are very similar to the Amish. They are branches of the same tree. They started out with a reformer called Menno Simons, who started out at the time of Martin Luther. And it was a group that left the Catholic Church, and which was huge at that day to leave the Catholic Church and sort of go out on their own. But they were pacifists. They didn't believe in fighting war, or didn't believe that they should fight wars. They felt like they were of another kingdom, another dimension, and so they didn't want to fight in wars. And as a result, many of them migrated to avoid, getting drawn into wars. And wherever they went, they stayed very communal. And so they migrated through Ukraine and Russia, and some are in Central America, Mexico, US, Canada, and so forth. So there's a huge community in Belize right now that's very traditional,
Hmm.
living and operating the same way as when they came over, probably a couple hundred years ago. Our community was a little bit more progressive than that, but still by any other standard was incredibly conservative in terms of how we were raised.
I was telling the audience before you came on that I used to live in northern Alabama, and it was literally like 10 miles from Tennessee, and there was a Mennonite community there. I don't know how big it was, but you could drive through the farms and they would sell eggs and cookies and different things like that. And I thought it was cool.
Yeah, I mean it's a whole other world when you
Yeah.
step into it. It
Yeah.
is. It's
Especially when you're driving through and everybody's in horse and buggy.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of the Mennonites uh, gave up horse and buggy and they adopted cars. But so the Amish typically tended to be known more for the horse and buggy side of things. But both of them, regardless, stayed quite conservative. And there's sort of a misnomer that they're against all technology entirely. That's not really the case. It was more the case that they were against anything that they felt threatened community. And community to them was important. It was important that you maintained a sense of community together and supporting one another, because that was how you modeled your religious beliefs. And so typically what happens is with the ultra conservative ends of it anyways, is when a new technology comes out, the elders of the community will come together and evaluate it. They'll maybe let one or two in the community test it and then decide, should we adopt this or not adopt this? Is it going to hurt the community or help it? And then they will make a collective decision as to whether or not they're going to adopt that technology for themselves. So they felt that cars would hurt the community because as people adopted cars, they started living further and further apart. So then they stopped really kind of being that shoulder to shoulder community that they wanted to maintain. But you'll see a lot of them in their businesses will have technology, running their businesses, but they won't have it in their homes. And they keep them very separate.
Makes sense. So, did you have some sort of spiritual awakening, or what was it that happened to you that led you to leave the community?
Yeah, so it was interesting. I grew up, in this community. Although my father kind of went against the grain and became an airline pilot. So I had this weird kind of juxtaposition of both experiencing the Mennonite community, but then also, traveling a bit and seeing the world with him. And but I went to Mennonite school and in high school, and I, kind of did everything that I was supposed to do. I was the good kid always growing up, doing what you were told and believing what was taught and so forth. And I remember in high school just kind of really becoming very disillusioned because, you know, I had been doing all the right things and I didn't feel happy. And, you know, I looked around and I kind of felt like, you know, my friends weren't happy either, although, you know, I can't really speak for them, but I knew I wasn't happy. And I decided that, you know, if what we were teaching was true, it was worth everything. You know, it was worth making a complete commitment. If it wasn't true, it wasn't worth anything. There wasn't going to be any in between. So I decided that I was going to allow God, you know, the divine, to have a chance to show me if this was real. So I started every night after school in the evenings. I'd be in my room and I'd start praying and meditating. I didn't know I was meditating at the time, but I was just kind of praying, asking for some sort of a real, tangible experience that would prove to me that this was real. And took a couple weeks, and then eventually, you know, 2 or 3 weeks in, I had this profound spiritual experience. It was, I think, my first taste of awakening. I wouldn't say I was awakened at that point, but it was certainly my first taste of it, where I just felt this incredible ecstatic joy and peace come over me. I felt myself getting warm and tingly and just full of just energy and life and love. I just felt that, you know, that universal love and oneness that people talk about. And it just blew me away. And over the course of the next 2 or 3 weeks, you know, I just continued in that. As I was going through school, I was just, you know, living on cloud nine. And but the experience was so different than what I was having in the church on Sundays, that it just didn't fit anymore with the experience that I was having. And then what happened was, as I mentioned, I was going to like a little Mennonite high school. It wasn't all Mennonites. There were some other kids that were sent there because it was a good school. And, you know, I was just kind of on cloud nine for a couple of weeks. And then some young man walks up to me who I never really interacted with. I had like a library session, and he comes up to me and he starts asking me for some advice. And it was very random and out of the blue. And so I start advising him, and through the course of that, just start describing the experience that I had been having. And I didn't know if it would work, but I just kind of took a bold step and said, "Do you want to try it?" And he said, "Well," he said, "Sure." So we went to the school chapel, which was quiet at the time, so it was just us. And I started praying for him, and he fell over in the middle of the prayer and started having this ecstatic spiritual experience on the ground. And while he's doing this, unbeknownst to me, somebody else had come in and seen it. And so, and he's sitting there literally with his jaw open, like literally his jaw open, can't believe what he's seeing. So I said to him, like, "Do you want to try it?" And he just nods his head yes. Can't even say yes. He just nods his head yes. So I prayed for him, and he fell over and the same experience happened. And then a few minutes later, the first guy got up and he goes, "Wow, you've got to do this for my friend." Now, to give you a bit of context, he was a school troublemaker. Had been suspended several times, was always getting in trouble. And he's like, "You got to do this for my friend." And I'm like, "Okay." So he leaves, and about 5 minutes later, he comes back with a girl who was the toughest girl in the school. She was a short, stocky young woman who basically beat up all the boys. Like literally, all the boys on campus were afraid of her. And she came in, and I was, you know, he's like, "Okay, do it for her, do it for her." And I was like, "Oh no!" I was like, "If this doesn't work, she's gonna beat the crap out of me." And so I didn't know what to do. I very nervously put my hands on her, and I started praying for her, and then she just broke, and she just started weeping, and then she fell over and had the same experience. And then it was about that time the bell rang, and we all had to sort of go off to our next thing. But what happened was that we started meeting in my house every night, and they started bringing all their friends who, interestingly, weren't the good Mennonite kids. They were all the school troublemakers. And they all started coming to my house. And at one point, we had about 30 or 40 showing up every night. And spontaneously, people started getting healed, and we started having, you know, psychic phenomena and just all sorts of strange things, you know, going on through that experience. And it kind of made me a bit of a black sheep in the Mennonite communities, you can imagine, because this was not something that happened in the Mennonite community or was supposed to happen. So I sort of knew at that stage that, my journey was going to have to continue outside of the Mennonite community. But for a while still, it was within the kind of realm of Christianity that, I continued on my spiritual journey.
So, what do you think was happening? Like, perhaps you were channeling your higher self and that was interacting with the people, or what?
Yeah, I would say that's probably a good way to put it. It was definitely, I was connecting into the universal consciousness or Christ consciousness, as I would call it. And, I was helping them to open themselves up to it. I'd walk them through just a simple process of opening themselves up to it and kind of yielding to that and facilitating that for them. But, it was, they were having the same experience themselves as well. And that experience, what it taught me is so much closer to us than we realized. It's really just about learning to yield and surrender to it. But it opened up to me sort of a very big life lesson that's been a theme for me as I've traveled through life since then. And that is the lesson about disillusion. My ability to engage with that and have that experience came from the fact that I was disillusioned with the life that I had. And, I struggled to find a single great spiritual leader who didn't at one stage become very disillusioned with the world in which they found themselves and said there has to be something more. And the whole concept of disillusionment is removing the illusion. It's letting go of the illusion. And I find that the reality on the other side, when you let go of the illusion, right, the reality is waiting on the other side. It's not about trying to achieve something. It's about letting go of something that isn't real to find what's more real. And if you do that, and if you open yourself to it, what is real will reveal itself. But it's not until you're ready to let go of what's not real that you can find what is real.
So, in your life, what was the illusion? The Mennonite way of life, or even something bigger?
So there were several stages of the illusion for me. The first was, yeah, disillusionment with our religion. I dealt with that at a very early stage. And then that was that sort of brought a major transformational leap for me. The second stage was really when I became disillusioned with the idea of success. I later had a sort of youth leader whom I revered, who was incredibly gifted and talented, who got caught doing some very inappropriate things in our group, and it kind of shook me up that somebody could be so successful, so talented and gifted, and yet fall in such a big way. And so at that stage, I said, okay, I said to the ever living that, okay, I want to live the fullness of whatever I'm meant to do on this earth, but I don't want to do it until I'm ready. I don't want to let I want to have the character to be able to support the gift and the talent that I have, and don't want to get caught up in the ego and things like that. So that was a second big sort of crisis point for me. And then the third one, which I can share with you next in my story, was really becoming disillusioned with Christianity and with the concept of God in general. And that was kind of a very big one for me. So basically what happened was, after leaving the Mennonite community, I thought that I was going to spend some sort of life, in the Christian world doing some kind of ministry. And so I went and joined a Bible college because I thought, well, that's what you do. And but this one was very interesting. They had a course called the School of Biblical Studies, which was designed to basically teach you how to read the Bible inductively. And that means reading the Bible without putting any of your presuppositions on it and letting it speak for itself. And then you're given a number of tools to learn how to interpret it. And most of it's just about learning about the history and the context and the culture within which those books are written. It's 66 books, all written by someone to someone for a specific purpose. And so much of what is in there is wrapped up in figures of speech and idioms and things like that that, those things are cultural shorthand, right? They explain ideas in a short way so that, people grasp it and they can make sense. Okay, I got that. So when we read it now through 21st century eyes, we don't understand the idioms, we don't understand the context. And without understanding those, sometimes some passages can seem the exact opposite of what they're originally trying to say, because it's locked up in historical context that we're unaware of. So for this course, as I mentioned, being 9 months, we had to basically read the Bible 5 times in a period of 9 months and write a paragraph by paragraph commentary on the entire book, the entire Bible, which was incredibly intense, but it was also eye-opening because I saw the whole story beginning to end, the whole sort of narrative arc of what was in there. And it was the start of really an unraveling for me, because I realized that so much of what I was taught in the church and what was being taught in the church didn't line up to what I was reading in the Bible. I started to see a very different picture of what Jesus was teaching. I started to see a very different picture of what the Old Testament was about. And I was really struggling with how that mismatched with everything else that I was hearing elsewhere. And so I continued another almost 10-year journey after the course, reading through it several more times to really sort of understand what all of this was about. Now, in the course of this, I ended up getting married and moving to a town in north of Scotland that was basically had a huge problem with drug abuse. And I was very poor. I didn't have any income. I had a wife that was pregnant. And I ended up having to take a basic job, and we had to move in an area that was a slum. And, I'd come home sometimes at night from my work really late. I'd come home at night. There'd be blood on my door because somebody had been shooting up under my porch light. I'd find, now with the young infant, I'd find hypodermic needles stuck in our lawn outside of our apartment. It was just the most miserable, awful experience. And I was in this incredible place of just being in a dark night. And to make a long story short, we kind of bettered that place as much as we could, moved into another place. I got a better job. And then my wife was pregnant with our second child, and this was at Christmas. This was like the week before Christmas. Company I was with was going through financial trouble. I ended up getting lost, letting go from work. And then our landlord, who had been abroad and promised we could have the house for a year, came back 6 months early, said she wanted our house back. We had a verbal contract, so I had nothing to fall back on. So we ended up homeless again. And we went to the local town council, said, we're homeless, we need somewhere to stay. I mean, literally had nowhere to stay. And they took us to this apartment that was, you only get one choice. This was it, take it or leave it. And the apartment was just as bad as the first. It was also in a slum area where we found out later, all the pedophiles. And the place was just awful. And remember standing in this place, looking out the window, and it was a real turning point for me. Because I think at that point I was so broken inside that I just couldn't believe that, I had any value, for the world. And inside somewhere, I said, I have to believe that life has more for me than this. And I knew that it was a major turning point for me. And so I turned to this woman from the homeless office, and I said to her, sorry, we're not taking this. And my wife was aghast because she knew we had nowhere to go. But I just knew I had to believe that, there was something better. So we went home. We begged and managed to find a place to stay with some friends for a few days. And it was after that I got this call from this very posh, well-spoken English lady, whom I had met maybe twice before, who had heard about our situation. And she and her husband lived in a Downton Abbey style manor house up in the Highlands. They were aristocracy, and they were also close friends of the Queen and Prince Philip and the whole royal family. They used to come over all the time for dinner when they were in residence at Balmoral. Harry and William swam with their kids in the pond in the garden, on the estate. And You know, they were their house was basically like a revolving door of, you know, as you can imagine, VIPs and celebrities and all these people staying all the time. But they're also quite spiritual people. And 6 months before this period, they had felt led that they were not to have anybody stay in their house for the first 6 months of the new year. And they didn't know why. But and this was unusual for them. There were always people coming to stay with them, literally every weekend. But they cleared their calendar for 6 months because they knew it was for some reason and they didn't know why. And when she heard about us, she told her husband, that's why. And I got this call from her and she said, we want you to come and stay with us. She didn't explain the story at the time. She said, we want you to come and stay with us. And I was like, it was an hour outside of our city. I was like, how am I going to find a job like this? And you know, all that. And I was like, I don't know. I can't come that far out. We can't impose on you. And she was insistent, would not take no for an answer. So we packed our car up with what belongings we had left in the world, and we drove out to the middle of the countryside to stay with them. And it was getting late at night. I'm a mile from their home, and I blow a tire on the car. And I'm just now at like the lowest lowest of points, going like, I can't even get my family somewhere safe to stay for the night. And so I call them, and she comes flying down the hill in her Audi, and you know, and he says, get in the car, and we throw our stuff in, and they drive us up and take us into the home and sit us down, and there's wine and pheasant on the table and all this stuff. And you know, and I'm apologetic, and I'm like, look, we're only going to be here for a couple of weeks. I'll find a job, we'll get on our feet, but thank you so much for your hospitality and so forth. And they said, no, you're not. I said, what do you mean? I said, no, you're going to be here for 6 months. You're going to be here. Your baby's going to be here, and we're going to look after you. And I was just, I couldn't take it in. I was like, I don't understand. I was like, I will find something soon. Don't worry about it. So they told me about the whole story of how they came to invite us there, and the whole thing. So life is looking out for you and is preparing the way for you, even if you're not even aware of it. And that was incredible to me, that even though I wasn't even in a state of mind yet for this 6 months previous, that whole place was already being prepared for us. But nevertheless, the sort of continuing on the story, life started to improve for us. But I found that I was growing more and more disillusioned with Christianity in general. I felt like more and more of what I was understanding in the Bible was just at odds with what I was teaching and hearing on Sunday mornings. And I was continuing on this path of understanding more about Christ and Jesus and exploring this whole spiritual experience that I was having. And at the same time, it was like, you know, we got to a place where we were better in terms of where we were living. Matter of fact, I've always stayed in amazing places after that. But it was like every time I was trying to find a way to get ahead in life, it was just nothing worked. I couldn't really get established in a career. My relationship with my wife hit the rocks. We were on the brink of divorce, and I felt really just at odds with the church. And I that stage I was connected with a man who kind of became a teacher of mine, but a close friend, one of the most enlightened souls I've ever met. He lived in Vancouver Island, and we started talking every day on the phone, and just buzzing back and forth about the ever living and our experience and awakening. And I remember at that time that I was going so far off from what I had known in Christianity, and I was really scared about where it was taking me. You know, where would I end up? Would I end up in the New Age, which to me at the time was, you know, like the worst possible thing that could imagine from what I was raised. But, you know, I knew I was heading away from what I had been taught. And, you know, I confessed this to him. I said, I'm scared about this. And he said to me, he says, Josh, he says, what are you worried about? Don't you think your father's big enough to get you where you need to go? And it was just like, just exactly what I needed to hear at that time. And with my life in total disarray, I basically took a walk and went out in this. We lived on this time on another estate in an ancient forest. And I was walking along this river, and I heard this, my inner guide, the spirit speak to me. and say to me, this was essentially the voice of God saying, would you believe in me even if you found out that everything you knew about me was wrong? And I had to think about that for a minute. And I realized that for all of my life, I was trying to fit everything into a box, into a mental construct of who or what I thought God was. And the question was, did I want the idea of God or did I want the reality of God? And so I said, I want the reality of you. And I was willing to let go of any preconception, any idea that I had about who or what God, the creator, whatever term you're comfortable with, might be. And when I did that, it was, as I was on this walk, it was something within me just completely let go. And it was just like my own self-consciousness and awareness sort of just melted away. And I, through that process, had like an avatar type moment where it was just all of a sudden, the whole world just came alive. I just felt this, all the plants around me, everything was just glowing with life. And I just felt this energy surging through everything and through me. And I realized that I was one with all of that, and all of that was one with me. There was no separation between me or anything else on this walk that I was having. All of that was an illusion. And it brought me to a place of complete and total peace that hasn't left with me. It's been my default state since then. I have moments and sometimes, sometimes extended periods where you kind of forget it and you get caught up in the ego and you get caught up in this sort of drama of life. And then you sort of let that go and you come back to oneness. And fortunately, as I'm getting older, I'm getting a little better at catching it sooner and, letting it go again and just returning to peace and oneness. And it's been so incredibly beautiful since then.
During your study of the Bible, did you ever look into the secret history of Jesus?
Yeah, that was very fascinating, actually. It was and you almost, if to really understand the context, you almost have to look into that. And what I sort of learned was that, and a lot of this has really been opened up to us in the last 100 years or so. Um, there were three major sects in Judaism at the time. There was a group called the Pharisees, a group called the Sadducees, and then there was the group called the Essenes. And the Essenes were the only one that wasn't mentioned in any of the Gospels by name, which is kind of gives you kind of a clue that who was writing this. But also if you look at where these Essenes had communities, so they were very communal. They lived in communes essentially. They shared everything in common. They were sort of an ascetic group. They were vegetarian, vegans, and they were known throughout Israel as being healers. If you needed healing, energy, physical healing of some kind, you went to these Essenes. They were also known as being seers, and they were astrologers. They were people of incredible wisdom, and they lived in these little communal groups, and they were all the places where Jesus spent time. So there was Nazareth, where Jesus spent his childhood. There was Jerusalem, and then there was one in Egypt as well. And then there was also one in Qumran, which is at the Dead Sea. And that's what happened was 100 years ago. They found some scrolls there that was basically the library that was maintained by the Essenes. And so by studying these scrolls, as they've been sort of able to piece them together to figure out what's what. They've learned so much about what they believed, both from their writings, but also from the works that they collected. And what we know about them was that they collected a lot of writings from the East, Buddhism, Hinduism, things like that. They looked a lot at Eastern philosophy. They were also reincarnationalists, which a lot of people don't know. And so Jesus and a lot of Jesus's teachings, a number of his parables and things like that were things that taken directly from the Essenes. So we know, it's pretty reasonably a reasonable assumption to deduce that Jesus came from this group called the Essenes. They were also known as the Nazarites. Jesus was colloquially known as a Nazarite, and they referred to him as Jesus of Nazareth. It was both the place where he came from, but it was also this group called the Nazarites, were the people of the Essenes. And a lot of the Essenes became the early followers of Jesus after his death. So from that, you can deduce that Jesus would have had a large amount of influence on his life from Eastern philosophy. And there's of course the stories about whether or not he may have traveled to, Tibet and India and so forth, which wouldn't be inconceivable if he was raised, learning about these teachings within the Essenic communities, and then decided to go and hear it directly from these teachers themselves in the East. But then that starts to shape your whole thinking in terms of understanding why his teaching was so different than what you would have read in the Old Testament.
Wasn't there a part in old Cairo where they claim Jesus lived? Like you can even visit his old house or something?
Yeah, it was the area, Alexandria, I think, is where he spent a large part of his childhood. But I don't know about Cairo, whether there was I don't know. I've never been. So
Hmm. So, after, so have you yourself started? Did you ever study Buddhism and Hinduism?
yeah, so I think so after I kind of had that awakening experience, I did start looking at comparative religion, and I started looking at a lot of what was being taught in the East. And I found so much of it helpful in terms of understanding the concept of non-dualism. It was interesting when I was in Christianity, we were taught against dualism, but then when I had this experience, I realized that actually it was so dualistic. It was this idea of God out there somewhere, and you had the side of the good, and then you had the evil side over here, and Satan and all of that. And we're caught in the middle between the good side and the evil side, and so forth. And it was a very dualistic way of thinking. And although I came to the idea of oneness through studying Christ and the symbolism around Jesus and everything that he was teaching, I came to that realization myself through the teachings of Jesus. Um, it was after that when I was started reading, I think my sort of gateway book to that was there was a Catholic monk from the US called Thomas Merton, who studied a lot of Taoism, and I think he co-wrote a book with the Dalai Lama at once. So he did this whole book on Taoism that was just really fascinated me. The idea, the teaching of the Tao and the uncarved block is so similar to the Christian teaching of the Logos. So I started exploring non-dualism through that. Then I started exploring, some of the teachers in Hinduism. Eventually, I was introduced to, Autobiography of a Yogi, which was just a fantastic book. And then there was this other book, The Second Coming of Christ, which, blew me away because all the stuff I had learned and discovered about Christ and the concept of Christ in the Bible was stuff that, I didn't hear anywhere taught in any churches. And then you pick up this book from a, Indian yogi, and I'm like, this guy gets it, more than any of the people that I'd ever grown up listening to. And I was surprised how profoundly a lot of the Eastern teachers got the concept of Christ and could understand it so easily because it was non-dualism.
Well, do you think religion provides value today to the world?
It's an interesting question. I do, but maybe not in the way that people think. So first off, you look at the word religion. The word religion comes from the Latin word religare, which means to bind together. And essentially, a religion is just a belief system. It's a social operating system that allows us to build community. Because to build community, you need to have a sense of cohesion and connection with other people to believe that, okay, we're all living for each other and working together and so forth. And humans have typically tended to struggle to build groups larger than about 140, 150 people for, the early part of human history. when we didn't have these sorts of belief systems, because essentially once you get beyond that, the group starts to fragment, and then they sort of to break off and create a new tribe, right? It's a principle in sociology called Dunbar's number, if anybody's interested in looking at that. And it was the idea of a belief system that allowed us to build larger communities, because you had this idea that, okay, I may not know you, Jeff, personally, but I know that if, we're part of the same group, we're part of the same religion, that we share and hold the same ideals and the same beliefs about the world. And therefore I can trust you and you can trust me, because we accept one another on that basis, right? So religion has served humanity in that way, by helping us to connect and build larger communities and to evolve and develop. But the problem is that when we view religion as being primary rather than supportive to our life and our evolution, and there's a great, and I don't believe Jesus came to start a new religion. I think that what Jesus, if you look at the prophecies of the Old Testament and the teachings of Christ, he was here to help us transcend religion. And there's a story about when he healed somebody on the Sabbath day. The Pharisees, one of the other sects, came to him and said, how can you heal somebody on the Sabbath? This is a work day. Well, when you're a Jew, of all their commandments, probably the most important commandment is to keep the Sabbath, because it's very symbolic about their idea that they rest in God. They came out of Egypt as slaves. And it was that, so they were working 24, not 24/7, but they were working 7 days a week, year in and year out. And, they developed this culture, and their practice of having a day of rest was a day to recognize that they belonged to God. So to violate the Sabbath was one of the worst commandments, to break. And when they asked him about this, why you healed somebody on the Sabbath, you did work on the Sabbath to heal this person. And his response was interesting. He said, the Sabbath was not made for man, but man was made for the Sabbath, which means man's not made for religion. Religion is made for man. It's a tool that's useful for us in helping us to create a social operating system where we can live and function together. But religion is not the same thing as spirituality. You can be spiritual without being religious. It's useful, and only in so much as it's useful. Once it outlives its usefulness, then it stops to get in the way. And there's very much a juxtaposition in many religions, where it's the religion itself that takes precedence over the knowing of the ever living, of the divine, and that spiritual journey and exploration. And I think that we're in a time where we're going to see a lot more people who either are transcending out of religion altogether entirely, or they will just find that the labels of religion become less and less important to them, because they are discovering this direct communion that they have with the divine, and they're discovering this direct communion that they have with other people who are also spiritual seekers, who are also awakened, seeking the light, seeking the truth. And you find that transcends anything that religion can create or offer.
All right, one couple quick questions. One is, are you up for letting the audience ask you questions?
Absolutely.
All right, so if you guys would like to ask Josh a question, type it in capital letters in the chat. That way it's easier to spot. And for those of you that weren't here at the beginning, Josh is not in Florida. He's in Tahiti. And so how did you wind up in Tahiti?
Yeah, so it was a very interesting journey. I had a period where this was kind of after the awakening experience. A lot of years of banging my head against the wall, sort of trying to figure out what's my purpose, why am I here, so on and so forth. And I came to this point where it was like, you know what, I'm going to stop worrying about all of that. And I said, until I'm so busy that I have to say no to something, I'm just going to say yes to everything, and just trust that the universe is going to get me where I need to go.
Kind of like that movie, Yes Man.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It was a lot like Yes Man.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like, okay, whatever comes along, I'm going to do it, and we'll see where I end up.
Mm-hmm.
It was like immediately after I said that, I had this email from somebody saying, inviting me to a networking event. I was living in London at the time. I had moved out of Scotland. And I was like, okay, well, I've just made this pact with the universe, so I'm going to go to this meeting and see what happens. And I get there, and somebody asked me if I knew somebody that could build a website, because they had this art show that they were running. Their website was terrible. It was opening in a week, and they weren't selling any tickets, and they were desperate to get somebody that could help them, fix it. And I had nothing else to do at the time, and I just made this pact. It's like they didn't have any money to pay me even. So I was like, look, I'll do this. I'll build a website for you. We'll sort it out financially later. But I'm going to follow there's thinking internally, I've got to follow this. So I built a website for them in like 2 days. Unfortunately, I knew how to build websites because of various things that I'd done previously. Built a website for them in 2 days. It was a huge success in terms of they were able to start selling tickets. So they invited me to the private view. In the private view, they had a lot of interesting, successful benefactors that were there supporting the show, and they introduced me around to everybody as the guy who saved their show. And I got asked from that to start doing some websites for some other companies. I never intended to start a web design business. But I was like, okay, well, this is where life seems to be taking me. So I built a website for one of the clients who owned this very high-end travel agency. They worked with some celebrities and billionaires and oligarchs and things like that. And I built a website for them. And in the course of building the website, I started kind of advising him on his business, because I actually had a lot of business experience previous to that. And it was also very intuitive with business. I was working from a very intuitive place. And so I said, maybe you should present your company like this and so forth. So he liked my ideas. We developed them. We put them on the website, and his company took off. And he was traveling around visiting various resorts, as he does, because it's his business. And he goes to this private island resort in the Maldives, and which ended up being one of the world's like top 5 private islands. And he sits down at dinner in the restaurant there at the resort, and happens to sit down next to the owner of the resort. And they hit it off and spent all night, talking and whatever else, and connected. And he told them afterwards, he said, you need to speak to my friend Josh, because essentially their website was really bad. So I got a call from the guys from this resort. It was his brother who was running the resort, and asked me if I might be able to help him. So I started talking to him, and then eventually his brother, about how I thought that they could change things in their marketing and their strategy. And they invited me out to the resort, met with them both there, and then they contracted me for, it was a couple of years just prior to COVID, just leading right up to COVID, where I helped them kind of re-engineer their business. And it took off. Actually, during COVID, the resort took off, and it was like full throughout the entire COVID period. And then that contract ended, because essentially I'd done my job, and I was kind of kicking around during COVID, wondering what I was going to do, because everything was shut down. And then I got a call from this resort in French Polynesia that I had known about, and is considered, well, if you Google it, it comes up as the top private island resort in the world. So I was well aware of it, and I got a call from the team inviting me to come and consult with them and do the same thing for them. And I really thought it was going to be just a sort of 3 or 4 week consulting gig, and that would be it. And I came out here, met with the team, and was just completely blown away by what they were doing. It's known very much as being a sort of celeb, hideaway, kind of very expensive, tropical getaway. But what was interesting was that, the resort was kind of the tip of a very large iceberg, under which was an entire research center that was doing world-class, groundbreaking research into understanding how to deal with climate change, how to do conservation, how to do sustainable hospitality and tourism, and so on and so forth. They're working with some of the top scientists and researchers in the world. And this group was just very sincere about the fact that they really wanted to change the whole entire tourism industry to make it more sustainable, more harmonious, and so forth. And I was just very impressed with what they were doing. And we really connected, and they asked me if I would join the team and basically help them develop out all of the, the ideas that I had brought to them. So, so I did that, and we moved here a little over a year and a half ago, and it's been incredible, experience ever since.
All right, let me catch up. I think I got quite a few questions that zipped by me while you were talking. How would you describe your relationship now with Jesus?
Very much still alive. I think that, I almost say that, I left Christianity, and it wasn't sort of like, people talk about deconstruction or whatever. Like, for me, it wasn't like a deconstruction. It was more of a gradual transition, where I just sort of moved further and further away from it. And it was all in my pursuit of understanding Christ. And it's something that is still very much alive to me in this day. Um, I don't know. I can deep dive on that a little bit more if you want, or you can, I don't know if you have some other questions you want to put across.
All right, let me get to another one. What is money a stepping stone to?
That's an interesting question.
It is.
Um, wow, very interesting question. Kind of a bit out of left field for the sort of conversation stream we've been having, but I think it's very interesting given sort of where I work and the type of
Mm-hmm.
people that I work with.
Right.
So yeah, I'm happy to sort of feed into that. Look, money is just one form of power, and power itself is a force that can be used, or it can be, used for good, or it can be used for bad. I think when it becomes the end objective, very often, it corrupts, it empowers our ego. And any form of power, if it is the objective in and of itself, can empower and amplify our ego. And I can give you some examples of this apart from money. And I think money can be used for an incredible good. And I think that it's something that is going to be a part of our lives for, even if we are in a state of ascension and spiritual ascension and evolution right now, I think it's still an important part and will be for the time to come. But when we look at sort of power, if we talk about, sort of, for example, spiritual power, um, a lot of the, what I was thinking about this earlier this morning, like, for example, a lot of what we're teaching right now in manifestation, as is true in that it works. You can manifest. But if you look at the Eastern schools, if you look at the monasteries where monks and the yogis used to go and practice in the ashrams and so forth, and where they would learning to develop that level of spiritual phenomena was not something that people were taught until they were much more advanced and much further in their spiritual journey. Because the reason being that if you took that on and you hadn't developed the character and you hadn't, learned how to master the ego, then that had the potential to actually amplify the ego and derail your spiritual journey. And so I think, I've some concerns. I was seeing a couple of videos just recently on TikTok of people who have gotten very deep into the manifestation, concept, who left into it because they heard about it and thought this is great and this is wonderful, and then got disillusioned with it, and then walked away entirely from it because they weren't ready for it, didn't fully understand it, and so forth, and essentially, it kind of turns the universe into a cosmic vending machine, whereas the point of us being here is to learn and to grow and to serve humanity. And so that's a part of the learning and growth, is learning to develop your spiritual capacities, but it's not the entire journey. And I think money is the same. It can be a tremendous skill to learn how to develop and grow and produce money. But at the same time, it's part of the journey, and you can't lose perspective of, why you're here in the first place.
What are the other forms of power?
Um, oh, there's all kinds. I mean, social power is huge, political power is big. they always say, like, never give, never put somebody in power that wants to be in power. I think it's, sort of overriding principle there, any way in which you're looking to empower yourself as the primary goal, what's going to end up happening is that you empower the ego, because the ego is of course very wily and loves to hide behind things like spirituality, or if you're very wealthy, philanthropy, or whatever it is that you use to justify your ego. And so if you start exploring things like spiritual power, your ego will tell you, oh, I'm this great wonderful person because I've managed to manifest this, and I've managed to create this spiritual phenomenon and develop this psychic phenomenon, those sorts of things. And then you start to, buy your own Kool-Aid. And I went through that experience, going through my dark night of the soul. I thought, oh, I have this great healing gift and all that sort of thing. And then what happens is when things stop working for you is when you really hit the dark night of the soul. Because I think that's sometimes when the universe, the creator says, okay, you need a time out here so you can work on some deeper things. And then you have to go through the disillusionment and realize that. And and so I think, we'll see more and more of that as people kind of hit the wall with, okay, I thought I was going to get the new house or the person of my dreams or the car of my dreams, and, all those sorts of things, and it didn't happen. And why am I struggling? And then you start to think, well, if I'm suffering, well, that must be because I'm not, a spiritual person, or I'm not growing, or I'm not this, that, or the other. If you look at a lot of the yogis and the great spiritual teachers, I mean, some of them lived in caves. They took vows of poverty. They had the ability to materialize anything, yet they chose not to, because for them it was never the goal. When they needed to, they did. Son of Man, said Jesus, has nowhere to lay his head, yet he could heal anything. He could produce wine from water, make money appear, and all that sort of stuff. So
Here's a question. Have you researched Jesus's studying of healing? Was it from the Essenes or from his travels to India?
well, that's the thing. We don't know. I mean, I think for sure, because the Essenes were very adept at it, for sure he would have learned from the Essenes. The whole story about him going to India is very interesting. I've read about that. Obviously, I've not seen the documents firsthand that purport to say he was there, but the story is very compelling. But for sure, he would have been taught that within the Essenes, because it was a common practice within their community.
Can you heal people without their knowledge?
Without their conscious knowledge, correct, because I have done that. I was on a trip one time in Costa Rica, and I stayed with a family that were incredibly poor. And they had a son who was about 15, who had been hit by a taxi and suffered quite severe brain damage to the point where he had a mental IQ of somebody who was like 4 or 5 years old. And we spent a week living with his family. He was an absolute like irritant to us the entire time, because he followed us everywhere. Was very childlike, and frustrating at times. He started stealing our stuff and so forth. And I was with a Christian group at the time, and we were just about to leave this community at the end. And I said to them, I had this very clear inner guiding that I was supposed to pray and do some healing work on him. And I told my group, I said, and I had so much faith at the time. I said, okay, I think we need to pray that he gets healed. So we all gathered around him, and he was at the mental state where he had no idea what we were doing. He just couldn't conceive of it. We came around him, and we laid hands on him and prayed for him. And then I opened his, and he's the whole time, like when, we were doing this, he was just sort of staring blankly off in the distance, didn't close his eyes, wasn't participating, anything like that. And I finished, and I fully expected to see this healed young man there, and nothing happened. I was like, okay, ego got a little, humiliated, but that's fine. So we left, and we went on to another village, and I didn't hear from the family again. And then about a year later, a friend of mine who was with me in that group went back to the village, and went back to visit the family. And he goes back and meets this boy, and this boy is completely normal, holding an adult conversation with him. And he said to him, "What happened?" And they said, "Well, it was the strangest thing. About 2 weeks after you left, something happened and he was just completely normal again." So I take that as that it worked. It just worked in its own time, and was quite encouraged by that. But yeah, I don't think you necessarily need somebody to be consciously aware of the work that you're doing, because you're doing a quantum level work when you're doing that. It does help if they're receptive to it, for sure, but it's not a prerequisite for it.
Do you have any advice for the viewers on how to prepare for the future?
Yeah, I think that we're in a time where we're going to see a lot of things shake and shift on this planet. And it could be, depending on your spiritual awareness and awakening, either the most exciting time to be on the planet or a very scary time to be on the planet. I think for those who are awake and aware, it's going to be a tremendously exciting time to be here on Earth, because I think we're going to see more and more people who are becoming disillusioned and becoming awakened, and they're going to be seeking out people who are awake and in the light to help them do so. And I think we're going to start to see new community emerge, and we're going to start to see spiritual community emerge, and the atmosphere connecting us and the higher dimensions is going to become much thinner, and we're going to see things much more clearly. And I think we're going to see it's going to be a tremendously exciting time. I think for those that have put their sort of trust and identity in the world systems of power, whether that be their social status, whether that be their economic status, whether that be their political security, and their nationalism and so forth, a lot of those things are going to be shaken. And if your identity sits with those things, it'll be very scary, because um, your identity will be shaken along with it. If your identity is, well, I'm successful, I'm a good person because I'm successful, because I built all this credibility and so on and so forth, and then when things don't work that way, then that will really start to shake your own sense of identity. So we're in a period that, for me, I'm very excited about. I'm excited about what's happening. I know I've heard a lot of the speakers that have been on your show and other shows talking about it as well. It's a big conversation right now. I don't think we're going to see any major cataclysms. I think we'll see some interesting weather events. I think we're going to see some interesting political events and so forth. But I don't, what I've been told is that I think the fear of what's happening will be worse than the reality of it for many of us. So, I would say at first, be at peace about the future. And then I think the second thing that I would say is really to know who you are, and to really know who you are, not you as in the person on earth having this incarnation, but you as the eternal being who is here for a moment in time. This is but a blip in your story. You're here to grow. You're here to grow up in your divinity, to be sons and daughters of God, to be co-creators, to serve humanity. And the more that you embrace that side of your identity, the more peace, joy, excitement that you will have to carry you forward into the future. And people will be looking for those who are having that peace. When they see everyone else in turmoil, and they see you in peace, and they see you in joy and happiness, they will be seeking you out. You won't have to go and seek them out. And then I think, alongside of that journey, serve in whatever way that you can with humanity. If your job is, if you're a painter, paint. If you are a decorator, decorate. If you are a gardener, garden. Serve in whatever capacity that you can, and do it as service to humanity. When I first had that first awakening experience, my after school job I was working in a factory cleaning toilets for about 300 men. And so you can imagine a blue collar factory with 300 men and probably about 40 or 50 latrines. And, to start with, I hated it. It was horrific, but it paid well and got me some pocket money. So I'd go and do that every day. Well, when I had this awakening experience, um, I literally could not wait every day after school to go and do that job, because I would go and I would shut the door and I'd shut the world out and I would just do this job. And inside, I was just in pure and complete ecstasy. I was just having the most incredible spiritual experience and oneness with the ever living. And I was serving, and it was the most rewarding and fulfilling thing. And so it doesn't matter how mundane your gifts and talents are. We all have gifts and talents, and use those to the best of your abilities. And the more you use those, the more that you will be given to use. So don't be afraid to start with small things, and just open your heart to allowing the universe to get you where you need to be. Because as my friend David said, your father is big enough to get you where you need to go.
Well, what are you working on that you want people to know about?
Well, this is a new chapter for me. I've been, very focused for a while in the business world, and serving that way and just on my own journey. And it was about 6 months ago that I started feeling a kind of a tug to, that I needed to begin stepping out a little bit more and sharing some of my spiritual insights, really because I feel like it's going to be important to help people prepare for what's coming. And so, I spent a few months preparing for that, and then this really has been the start of that, was just kind of reaching out and just putting out and sharing my story. And then I've started producing some content on YouTube, which I'm also, resharing on Instagram and TikTok. So if you want to find me there, I'll be continuing to deep dive into various topics. And if you want to connect with me directly, I don't have a website up. But if you want to connect with me directly, I'd say the best way would be to find me on Instagram. The account is everliving1. So ever, EVER living, 1ONE. You can find me there on Instagram and on YouTube. Reach out to me if you have any questions, whatever. I'd be happy to respond. And it'll help me as well to understand what content's useful, and I can continue to develop that.
Well, Josh, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Yeah, I mean, it's just simple, like I think as, Beth said, I want to echo that. Everything is love, you know, that's all it is. And I, I one time felt the voice of the spirit speak to me and say, I knew that, as the Bible said, God is love. And I felt this voice speak to me and say, okay, if I am love, imagine that you were going to imagine what the perfect, most loving, creator being could be like. And I spent time imagining in my head, what would that look like? And then the response came back to me afterwards saying, I'm even more amazing than them. And, I feel often that the love of the divine, of the ever living, so much more profoundly great than we can even comprehend. And so you can do, if there's one focus in your life, is learning to live and immerse yourself in that love and learning to share that love with others. That's all that life's about. That's all this spiritual awakening journey is about. We can talk about different methods and practices and so on and so forth, but at the end of the day, it's all just that.
Josh, thank you for your message, and thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us today.
Thanks so much for having me, Jeff. I really appreciate it.
All right, have a great rest of your day over there.
Bye.
Bye-bye. All right, that was Josh. All right, that was a busy show tonight. And speaking of love, I wanted to show the most loving dog in the world. Where is she? She's laying down over there. I think she was basically laying down asleep, but we can bring her over. I had to wake her up to say hello to everybody. And her new haircut. If you didn't see her, if you weren't here last week, This is her new haircut. She's almost kind of got like a bob. I think it's really cute, the way that her ears were cut. All right, what is Mika? What is this YouTube channel? Oh, I thought you said I saw Mika, and then below it I saw what is his YouTube channel. I'll put links to both of my guests' YouTube channel after I finish this. I first thought they said, what is Mika's YouTube channel? Maybe I should create a channel for you, Mika. What do you think? She has an Instagram channel. We should probably be posting more, but we haven't. But maybe we should start posting there for her on her Instagram channel. Anyways, again, guys, thank you so much for hanging out with us. Tomorrow night is Vivian Chavez. She's a very prominent UFO experiencer. And basically, she told me that she is an ET. And I, you know, as you guys know, or at least the regulars here know, that I've been asking, when am I going to get an ET on the show? And basically, I think the way she's putting it is that she is an ET that has incarnated as a human this time. So, can I say that I finally had an ET on the show? Maybe I can. And I've had her once before, and I don't know if you remember, but one of my guests told me that you've already had an ET on the show. And I was like, who is that? So maybe it is her. But she's tomorrow night. The next night is someone from the Raelian group or the Raelian movement, and you may have heard of them from the Netflix special about them. So I hope you enjoy that. And then all this week, NDE guests to be recording. So we're going to have a lot of NDE guests coming up, and who knows what else. So thank you guys so much for hanging out with us tonight. We really appreciate you. We love you. God bless you, and